Now, we've seen before that every single HTML element on screen is just treated as a box by our CSS. And by styling that box, by changing its height, its width, its margin, its padding, that's how we can determine how our elements can be laid out and how it will show up on screen. So, for example, if we specified a CSS rule that targeted all the images on this I Love Bacon website to say that it should have a width of 100%, all that's going to do is it's going to change the width of that box to 100%, and in the process scales up our image so that it expands to fill the entire width of our screen. And this concept in CSS is lovingly known as the box model. To explain this, let's take a simple div that we've given a background color to. And let's say that this div has a height of 300 pixels and a width of 300 pixels to begin with. Now, if I change the height to 600 pixels, then that div will expand vertically, pushing down any other divs or any other content that's not inside this current container. Now, I can also do the same with the width and make it much wider so that anything that used to be on the right of this current box would get pushed out of the way. Now, you've seen that we can specify these values either as static pixels, so for example here, or we can use percentages. For example, I can say that the width should be 100%, and that refers to 100% of the viewport. Now, the viewport is just the screen that you're viewing the website on. So that could be your laptop screen or your mobile screen or your iPad screen, but this will expand to 100% of whatever that screen size may be. Now, here's where it gets interesting. In addition to the width and the height of an element, you can also specify that it should have a border or not. Now, if you say that the border is going to be a solid border using CSS, then you will see a default 3-pixel border show up around your element. Now, remember that this border doesn't encroach on the size of your element. So if it's 300 pixels by 300 pixels, that blue area is still going to be 300 by 300. But you can expand the border size to say that the border width should be 50 pixels all round. So that's 50 pixels on every single side. So now the width of this entire element is actually much wider, because in addition to 300 pixels width for the original element, so that's the blue part, we've now also got a 50 pixel border on each side. And the entire thing now takes up 400 pixels. Now, instead of specifying a border width for all 4 sides, you can override that border by saying specifically that the border top should only have 0 pixels. Alternatively, you can use the circle shorthand. So it means that we're going around in a circle starting from the top. So the border width starting at the top is going to have 0 pixels at the top, 10 pixels at the right, 20 pixels on the bottom, and 30 pixels on the left. And as you go clockwise, you give your element dimensions that you specify for all 4 sides. And there's other variations around this theme as well, which you'll find in the documentation. Now, let's take this one step further. Let's say that we had some content in our div or in our box. Now, let's say that we had some text, for example. The first thing that we remember is that even if our div or our box had no height and no width, it will have the height and width in order to fit our content. Now, let's say that we didn't like the way that this looked. We want to have a little bit of padding or a little bit of space between the text and the edge of the element or where the border starts. Well, then we can actually specify some padding. And this says that there should be 20 pixels of space on all 4 edges between the text and the edge of the element. So now our box is even bigger. The padding actually increases the size of your box. Now, the final dimension that we can add is the margin. And the margin is a buffer zone, if you will, between the current element and any others that are on screen. So say if I had another element on the right, the margin gives our element a little bit of space between each other outside of the border. And now you can start to see how we can use the margin, the padding, the border, the width and the height to start affecting the layout and the appearance of all of our HTML elements, which, as you remember, at the end of the day are just boxes. So that box model is shown every single time you inspect on an HTML element. And you can see this little diagram in the Chrome Developer Tools every single time you hit inspect. So for example, if I select this div, then this is the current box model. It has no margin, no border, no padding, but it has a width and a height of this amount. Now, if I select the H1, then you can see that this actually has a margin at the bottom, which is 21.4. And that's what's pushing it away from this paragraph element. But the paragraph element also itself has some values. For example, a 16 pixel margin at the top and the bottom. And if I highlight this margin part on the box model, then you can see it show up highlighted in orange on our website. Now, it's pretty easy to edit these values using the box model inside Chrome Developer Tools, and that allows you to quite easily visualize what each of these things are doing. So for example, say if I wanted to give a little bit of padding to the contents inside my div, then I could double click on this padding here, and I could say maybe 20 pixels from the top and 20 pixels from the left. And now you can see that my text, my content rather, is pushed out from the left and from the top. Now, and it adds those rules over here in the styles. Now, instead of doing that, I could also just say, let's give it a 20 pixel padding all around, all four sides. And you'll notice that the background color is now in an area that's much bigger. And by increasing the padding, we've actually increased the size of our element. Now, that's not true for all of these different things. For example, let's add a 20 pixel margin all around our div. Now, the parts that have the background color represents our element, and the margin just takes it away from all the other things around. So in this case, we don't actually have much else around. We've only got the top, the left, and the right of the screen to push it away from.